The village of Ashcombe had long forgotten the road that climbed toward Blackthorne Hall. Wild ivy swallowed the stone walls, ancient oaks leaned across the crumbling path, and every child raised within sight of the distant estate grew up hearing the same warning. The house belonged to the Duke who never smiled, the Duke who had buried every servant that stayed too long. The Duke whose windows glowed late into every storm, as though someone inside still searched for a life that had already vanished. Stories changed with every generation, but one detail never disappeared. Somewhere inside Blackthorne Hall stood a library so vast that no living soul had seen all its shelves. Thousands upon thousands of forgotten books gathered dust while the rest of England rushed toward modernity. The library had become less of a room and more of a legend. People whispered that maps disappeared inside it, that scholars entered through one door and emerged days later through another with gray hair they had not possessed before, that the books remembered every secret ever hidden between their pages. Most laughed at such tales. Yet no one volunteered to test them. The Duke had never invited anyone inside until one autumn morning when a single letter changed everything. Miss Eleanor Ashford was not expecting fortune when the messenger arrived. She had spent the better part of 5 years restoring damaged manuscripts for museums that barely remembered to pay her on time. Her tiny workshop above the village apothecary smelled of leather bindings, beeswax polish, and drying parchment. Every cracked spine that entered her hands left stronger than before. Every faded page regained words that history had nearly surrendered. She possessed the rare gift of seeing patience where others saw ruin. Her father had once told her that books behaved like people. Ignore them long enough, and they forgot how to speak. Listen carefully enough, and they revealed far more than they intended. Eleanor had built her entire life around that lesson. She believed forgotten things deserved another chance. That belief had made her respected among historians. It had also made her desperately poor. When the sealed envelope bearing the Blackthorne crest landed upon her work table, she assumed someone had mistaken the address. Dukes did not hire women whose greatest achievement involved repairing worm-eaten hymnals. Yet her name had been written with remarkable precision across the front. The wax seal remained unbroken until trembling fingers finally opened it. Inside rested only a single page. Miss Eleanor Ashford, your reputation has reached Blackthorne Hall. I require a conservator capable of restoring a neglected private collection. You will arrive on Monday before sunset. Accommodation shall be provided. Compensation shall exceed any fee previously offered to you. You are not to inquire why the collection has remained untouched. You are to restore the books and nothing more. Signed, Alistair Ravenscroft, Duke of Blackthorne. No greeting, no farewell, only instructions. Her landlord nearly fainted upon hearing the offer. Friends insisted she refuse. One elderly bookseller quietly crossed himself after hearing the Duke's name. Even the coachman hired to carry her luggage hesitated before accepting payment. Everyone possessed a story about Blackthorne Hall. None could agree whether the Duke was cruel, grieving, cursed, or simply mad. Eleanor listened without interruption. Then she packed her tools anyway. Fear had never restored a single book. Rain followed her carriage through hills wrapped in silver mist. By the time Blackthorne Hall appeared beyond the trees, evening had swallowed the last warmth of daylight. The estate seemed carved directly from the surrounding cliffs. Endless towers reached toward clouds that refused to move. Gargoyles watched from every corner as though counting visitors. Windows reflected nothing. Even the gardens appeared frozen between life and decay, beautiful enough to inspire awe, yet silent enough to encourage retreat. The great entrance doors opened before the carriage fully stopped. No servants greeted her. Instead, a single older gentleman, dressed in immaculate black, stepped forward, carrying a lantern whose light barely touched the surrounding darkness. Miss Ashford. His voice contained neither welcome nor hostility. "I am Mr. Hawthorne, steward of Blackthorne Hall." He accepted her luggage without waiting for permission. His footsteps echoed through corridors lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed unwilling to release newcomers. Massive chandeliers hung overhead, yet only every third candle had been lit. Dust coated marble statues. Silk curtains remained permanently drawn across towering windows. The estate possessed unimaginable wealth, but lived as though mourning something too painful to acknowledge. "Dinner has been prepared," Mr. Hawthorne announced. "Will the Duke be joining me?" Eleanor asked. "No." "Has he already dined?" "No." The steward offered nothing further. Questions dissolved beneath the weight of his silence. After a meal, remarkable enough for royalty, yet eaten entirely alone, Eleanor was escorted deeper into the mansion, until they reached enormous oak doors, reinforced with black iron hinges. Mr. Hawthorne paused. "The Duke requested that I unlock these personally." Metal scraped against metal. One lock, then another, then another. 7 locks in total. The doors slowly opened. Cool air rushed outward, carrying the unmistakable scent of ancient paper. Eleanor stepped inside. Her breath disappeared. The library stretched farther than imagination permitted. Towering shelves climbed 3 stories toward painted ceilings, hidden beneath shadows. Spiral staircases connected endless balconies, overflowing with books bound in leather, velvet, linen, and faded cloth, whose colors time had almost erased. Massive globes occupied forgotten corners beside astronomical instruments older than kingdoms. Ladders rested against shelves that seemed to continue forever. Stained glass windows transformed moonlight into rivers of blue and crimson flowing across polished wooden floors. Everywhere she looked, history waited, not displayed, not celebrated, simply abandoned. Thousands of books rested exactly where someone had left them decades earlier. Dust floated lazily through shafts of pale light. Silence wrapped around every shelf until even breathing felt intrusive. She forgot the mansion, forgot the journey, forgot the Duke. For one impossible moment, she believed she had entered the memory of civilization itself. "Magnificent," she whispered. A voice answered from somewhere beyond the shadows. "It used to be." She turned sharply. A tall man emerged between towering shelves, carrying no candle despite the darkness. His coat remained perfectly tailored, though faint streaks of dust clung to one sleeve. Dark hair framed features too sharp to be called merely handsome. Gray eyes observed her with exhausting calm. They belonged to someone accustomed to disappointment. Someone who had spent years expecting the world to fail him. The Duke required no introduction. His presence filled the room before a single title had been spoken. "Miss Ashford, Your Grace." He glanced toward the shelves rather than toward her. "You expected grandeur. I expected books worth saving. Most people expect ghosts. Do you have any?" His expression almost shifted. "Almost. No, only memories." Without another word, he began walking deeper into the library. She followed. They passed collapsed reading tables awaiting repair. Shelves bowed beneath the weight of centuries. Entire collections remained wrapped in linen sheets, untouched by daylight. One corner displayed stacks of unopened crates, stamped with dates nearly 70 years old. Finally, he stopped before an enormous circular reading room crowned by a glass dome fractured by age. "This was once the finest private library in England," he said quietly. "Scholars crossed oceans merely to spend one afternoon here. Why was it abandoned? Because the one person who loved it died." His answer arrived without hesitation, yet somehow sounded rehearsed, as though he had repeated those exact words enough times to remove every trace of emotion. "Your task begins here tomorrow morning. You may access every room except the Western Archive. You may restore any volume requiring attention. If you discover personal correspondence, you will place it unopened inside this box." He indicated a carved mahogany chest already containing several sealed envelopes. "You are not to read private letters. "Of course, Your Grace." He studied her face for a long moment. "Most people lie when they promise restraint. I do not. We shall see." He turned toward the doorway before stopping once more. "Miss Ashford." "Yes." "Some books prefer remaining forgotten." The warning lingered long after he disappeared into darkness. Eleanor stood alone beneath the cracked dome, listening to distant rain striking ancient glass. Somewhere within the endless shelves, wood creaked softly, as though the library itself had exhaled after years of silence. She placed her hand upon the nearest weathered spine. Dust coated her fingertips. The book seemed almost warm. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Deep within Blackthorne Hall, a clock struck midnight. And hidden somewhere among more than 30,000 forgotten volumes rested a single letter that had waited 20 years for someone brave enough to find it. Quick pause for just a second. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate your support. These cinematic stories take a tremendous amount of time to write, produce, and bring to life. And your subscription helps this channel continue creating even bigger and better episodes. So, if you haven't already, take just 1 second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story, because from this point forward, everything changes. Morning arrived reluctantly beneath thick clouds that refused to surrender the sun. Eleanor woke before the servants stirred, dressed in simple working clothes, gathered her restoration tools, and returned to the library while the rest of Blackthorne Hall remained wrapped in silence. The 7 locks opened one by one beneath Mr. Hawthorne's practiced hands before he silently disappeared once more. The enormous doors closed behind her with a weight that sounded strangely final. For the first time in years, the forgotten library belonged to someone willing to listen. She began exactly where every restoration deserved to begin: observation before intervention. Every shelf revealed its own history. The eastern wing contained illuminated manuscripts, carefully arranged according to language rather than age. The southern galleries held philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Entire sections remained untouched, beneath protective linen covers placed there by hands that clearly intended to return the following day. That day had never come. Dust alone told stories. Some shelves carried decades of neglect. Others had been disturbed more recently. Someone still wandered these aisles. Not often, not comfortably, but enough to leave faint interruptions across otherwise undisturbed layers of gray. She knelt beside the first damaged volume. Its leather binding had cracked almost entirely along the spine. Pages had begun separating from their stitching. Moisture had reached only the outer edges, leaving the text itself remarkably intact. Careless hands would have replaced the cover. Eleanor never believed in replacing what patience could preserve. Every scar deserved understanding before correction. Hours disappeared unnoticed. Needle, thread, paste, gentle pressure, measured drying. 1 restored volume slowly became 3, then 7, then 12. The silence never felt empty. Old libraries breathed. Wood settled. Pages shifted. Leather tightened against changing temperatures. Ancient buildings possessed rhythms invisible to hurried people. By midday, she no longer noticed them, until another sound interrupted the familiar chorus. Footsteps. Not approaching. Retreating. She looked up. No one occupied the aisle beyond her table. Perhaps Mr. Hawthorne checking the locks. She returned to her work. Several moments later, another sound reached her ears. A ladder moved, very slightly, wood scraping polished oak. She stood. Every ladder remained perfectly still. The enormous room offered nowhere for anyone to disappear quickly. Yet certainty prickled across the back of her neck. Someone had been watching. The feeling vanished as quickly as it arrived. She forced herself to smile. Old buildings encouraged imagination. That was all. By afternoon, she discovered the cataloging desk. Unlike the rest of the library, it remained astonishingly organized. Hundreds of handwritten ledgers recorded acquisitions spanning centuries. Every book possessed its own entry detailing purchase dates, previous owners, repairs, even notes about damaged pages. Whoever maintained the records had loved precision almost as much as literature. The final ledger ended abruptly. No concluding sentence. No farewell. Only an unfinished line. October 14th. Received correspondence regarding. The ink stopped mid-stroke. The page beneath remained blank, as though the writer had stood unexpectedly and never returned. Eleanor closed the ledger slowly. Something about unfinished writing always unsettled her more than death itself. Death explained endings. Interrupted sentences did not. Late that afternoon, Mr. Hawthorne entered carrying tea. "You have restored 23 volumes. 24, she corrected gently. The atlas beneath the window required only minor reinforcement. His eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. Few people notice the atlas. Few people notice books at all. For a fleeting instant, something resembling approval crossed the steward's weathered face. "Dinner will be served at 7. Will the Duke be joining me this evening?" "No." "Does His Grace ever eat with company?" "Not any more." The answer lingered long after the steward departed. Not any more. Not never. Something had changed. Someone had changed him. The question settled quietly inside her mind beside countless others already gathering. That evening, rain gave way to heavy fog drifting across the estate until Blackthorne Hall seemed suspended above clouds rather than earth. Eleanor wandered the guest corridor, unable to sleep. Portraits lined the walls just as they had downstairs. Generations of Ravenscroft ancestors stared outward with practiced confidence. Then one painting stopped her completely. A young woman, perhaps 23. Chestnut hair gathered loosely beneath a ribbon, kind eyes alive with impossible warmth. Unlike every other portrait, she smiled openly. The brass plaque beneath read Lady Isabel Ravenscroft, 1849 to 1871. She studied the face. There was something hauntingly familiar about the expression. Not because Eleanor recognized the woman, because she recognized the emotion, hope, the sort that believed tomorrow always arrived carrying better news. A quiet voice emerged behind her. She adored this house before it became a prison. Eleanor turned. The Duke stood several feet away holding a single candle. His face looked more exhausted than it had the previous evening. "I apologize," she said. "I was merely looking. Most people hurry past her portrait. I could not." "No, few can." Silence stretched comfortably between them. She finally asked the question almost without thinking. "She was your wife?" He nodded once. "She died young. 27. I am sorry. Everyone says that. Does it help?" "No." He regarded the portrait rather than Eleanor. She believed forgotten things deserved rescuing. The library was her greatest joy. Every birthday, she filled another shelf. Every Christmas, another shelf. Eventually, there were no empty shelves left. He almost smiled at the memory. She insisted that every child deserved access to books regardless of birth. Villagers came here every Saturday. Imagine that. Children laughing inside Blackthorne Hall. Now even the servants whisper. His voice faded. Eleanor looked again toward Lady Isabel's painted smile. She must have been remarkable. She was. Another silence. Different this time. Less guarded. The Duke finally turned away. "You remind me of her." The words surprised both of them. He immediately straightened. "Forget I said that. Good night, Miss Ashford." Before she could respond, he disappeared into darkness. She remained standing beneath Lady Isabel's portrait long after the candlelight vanished. Not because of the comparison, because of the sadness hidden beneath it. For the first time, the Duke no longer resembled the cold figure described by villagers. He resembled someone who had spent 20 years surviving instead of living. The following morning, Eleanor reached the library before sunrise. Fog pressed against the stained glass windows, while pale light slowly filtered through colored panels overhead. She climbed one of the spiral staircases toward the upper galleries, where history had gathered beneath even thicker layers of dust. Few footprints marked the wooden walkway. None appeared recent. Halfway along the northern balcony, she noticed something unusual. One shelf contained books arranged entirely by height rather than subject. Beautiful. Perfectly symmetrical. Completely inconsistent with every surrounding section. Curious. She removed the smallest volume. Nothing happened. She examined the shelf itself. The wood behind the books looked darker, less faded, as though sunlight had not touched it for generations. She reached farther inward. Her fingertips brushed cold iron. A hidden latch. It clicked softly. Somewhere beyond the shelves, ancient gears groaned awake. The entire bookcase shifted no more than an inch, just enough to reveal darkness beyond. Eleanor stared in disbelief. A concealed passage inside a library. She remembered the Duke's warning immediately. Every room except the Western Archive. Was this the archive? Or something entirely different? Common sense urged her to close the passage. Professional integrity demanded restraint. Curiosity quietly defeated both. She lifted the lantern from the nearby reading desk and stepped inside. The passage proved narrower than expected. Stone walls replaced carved oak. Dust lay undisturbed across the floor, except for a single trail of footprints. Not ancient, not recent, weeks old perhaps. Someone had entered here. Someone besides her. The corridor ended at a small circular chamber, hidden completely within the walls of the mansion. Unlike the magnificent library outside, this room contained almost nothing. One wooden desk, one chair, one narrow window overlooking the cliffs, and hundreds of sealed bundles of letters tied carefully with faded blue ribbon. Every bundle bore the same elegant handwriting. To Isabel, to Isabel, to Isabel. Year after year. Dozens. Perhaps hundreds. Eleanor's pulse quickened. This was no archive. This was someone's heart preserved in paper. Then her eyes settled upon the desk. Unlike every other letter, the single envelope resting there had never been sealed. Its page remained unfolded exactly where the writer had abandoned it. Fresh ink had long since faded brown. Across the top stood only 6 words. My dearest Isabel, if only I had. Eleanor stood motionless as the silence pressed against her from every side. Dust floated through the narrow beam of light, spilling from the tiny window, drifting across the unfinished page like memories refusing to settle. Her fingers hovered above the letter before withdrawing again. The Duke had been unmistakably clear. Personal correspondence was not to be read. Every unopened letter belonged inside the carved mahogany chest. Every private word was to remain private. Yet this letter was different. It had never been folded, never sealed, never delivered. It rested upon the desk, exactly as though the writer intended to return within moments to finish the sentence. Those moments had become decades. She looked around the hidden chamber. No portraits, no expensive furniture, no signs of noble privilege, only paper, hundreds upon hundreds of letters written in the same careful hand. An entire lifetime, measured not in years, but in words left behind. The room did not resemble a secret archive. It resembled grief. Eleanor carefully stepped backward. She had no intention of betraying the trust placed in her. Whatever waited inside those pages belonged to another soul. She reached toward the hidden latch, preparing to leave exactly as she had entered. Then something caught her eye. The unfinished letter had shifted, not because of wind, not because of her movement. A tiny corner had lifted beneath its own weight, revealing another sheet hidden underneath. It was not a letter. It was a drawing. She leaned closer. A detailed sketch of the library exactly as it had appeared years before. Children filled every reading table, laughing over open books. Scholars debated beside enormous windows. Elderly villagers shared tea near the fireplace. Lady Isabel stood near the center, smiling, as she handed a storybook to a little girl whose feet barely touched the floor. In one corner stood the Duke, much younger, watching her instead of the crowd. The artist had captured something photographs rarely achieved: love without performance, the kind revealed only when one believed nobody else was looking. Eleanor gently placed the drawing exactly where she had found it. No wonder the library had become unbearable after Lady Isabel died. Every shelf carried her fingerprints. Every room echoed with her voice. Leaving had probably hurt less than remembering. She slipped quietly back into the passage and carefully pushed the hidden shelf into place. The latch disappeared. The books aligned perfectly. No evidence remained that the secret room had ever existed, except within her own thoughts. She returned to her restoration table, unable to focus. The damaged atlas before her blurred repeatedly beneath wandering questions. Why hide the letters instead of destroying them? Why write hundreds that would never be sent? Why leave the final one unfinished? And most importantly, why had someone entered that chamber only weeks earlier? The dust inside had not lied. Someone still visited. Late that afternoon, footsteps interrupted her concentration once again. This time they belonged unmistakably to the Duke. He approached carrying an old leather volume whose cover had nearly detached from its spine. Can this be repaired? She accepted the book carefully. Certainly. He remained standing beside her work table rather than leaving immediately. My mother used to read this every winter. I had forgotten it existed. She examined the inside cover. A handwritten inscription appeared beneath the family crest. For Alistair, may stories teach you kindness before power ever teaches pride. Mother. Eleanor smiled faintly. She sounds wise. She was. Did she also love books? No. She loved the people who loved books. There is a difference. He looked across the endless shelves. My father built this library because great houses required great libraries. My wife filled it because she believed books could save lives. Who do you think understood it better? Eleanor answered without hesitation. Your wife. For the first time she witnessed something almost impossible. The Duke laughed. Quietly. Briefly. But genuinely. Mr. Hawthorne insists I hired the correct conservator. Mr. Hawthorne speaks highly of very few people. Then perhaps I should consider it an honor. Perhaps you should. He studied the repaired volumes stacked neatly across the table. The library feels different because the books are being touched again. No, because someone believes it deserves another future. His voice carried unexpected warmth. You restore more than leather, Miss Ashford. You restore purpose. He left before she could answer. From the upper balcony, another pair of unseen eyes watched the conversation until the Duke disappeared. The figure retreated silently behind the shelves. Eleanor never noticed. That evening she wandered into the neglected gardens surrounding Blackthorne Hall. Ancient hedges framed forgotten pathways, now overgrown with ivy. Marble benches leaned beneath climbing roses that had long since escaped careful pruning. A fountain stood dry at the center of the estate, its stone angel weathered by decades of rain. Someone had recently placed fresh flowers there, white lilies, no more than 2 days old. She frowned. The Duke rarely left the library, according to every servant she had encountered. Mr. Hawthorne spent most of his days managing the estate, who continued bringing flowers. A soft voice answered from behind. She always preferred lilies. Eleanor turned. An elderly gardener stood, holding pruning shears worn smooth by years of use. His face carried the deep lines of someone who had spent an honest lifetime beneath changing seasons. You knew Lady Isabel since she first arrived as a bride. He smiled toward the fountain. She insisted flowers belonged everywhere. Inside the house, outside the house, even the kitchens, especially the kitchens. The servants adored her. Did she often come here? Every evening. She would read beside the fountain while His Grace pretended to inspect the gardens. Pretended. The old gardener chuckled. Young love believes nobody notices. Everyone noticed. The Duke simply believed. Staring at his wife from across the roses counted as gardening. Eleanor laughed softly. It suited the memory somehow. What happened after she died? The gardener's smile disappeared. The flowers stopped blooming. Because nobody planted them. Because nobody looked at them. There is a difference. His answer lingered with uncomfortable truth. Before Eleanor could ask another question, he carefully placed the remaining lilies beside the fountain. Tell His Grace she is not forgotten. He walked away before Eleanor managed to reply. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the unfinished sentence waiting inside the hidden chamber. My dearest Isabel, if only I had. Had what? Loved her sooner. Protected her better. Spoken differently. Stayed longer. Countless endings crowded her imagination. None satisfied the weight carried by those 6 unfinished words. Near midnight, another sound drifted through the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. She quietly opened her bedroom door. The corridor lay empty, yet faint candlelight flickered around a distant corner, leading toward the library. Curiosity returned stronger than caution. She followed. The mansion remained silent, except for the old floorboards beneath careful footsteps. As she approached the library doors, she realized they already stood open. Impossible. Mr. Hawthorne always locked them. 7 locks. Every night. She entered cautiously. Only a handful of candles burned throughout the enormous room. The library seemed larger in darkness, almost alive. Then she heard it. Someone speaking. Not loudly, not clearly. Simply a voice carried through endless shelves. She moved closer. The Duke stood alone, beneath the cracked glass dome where they had first met. He held a single letter in trembling hands. His back faced the entrance. I should have told you sooner, he whispered into the silence. I thought there would always be another tomorrow. His voice broke. Tomorrow became 20 years. Eleanor froze. She had stumbled into something never meant for witnesses. Quietly, she began stepping backward. A floorboard creaked. The Duke turned instantly. Their eyes met across the vast reading room. For one unbearable moment, neither moved. Then his expression hardened. You should not be here. I am sorry, Your Grace. I heard someone inside. He looked toward the letter still resting in his hands. Tomorrow always comes for everyone, except those who wait too long. Without another word, he folded the page, extinguished the candle, and disappeared into the darkness between the towering shelves. Eleanor remained standing beneath the shattered dome, her heartbeat echoing through the endless library. Only after he had gone did she notice something lying on the floor where he had been standing. A single envelope, not the one he carried. Another one, yellowed with age. Its seal had never been broken. Across the front, written in Lady Isabel's unmistakably elegant hand, were 4 words that changed everything. For my husband alone.
If you've made it this far, you've probably realized this isn't just a story about an old library or a lonely duke. It's a story about the words people never managed to say, the letters they never delivered, and how a single moment of silence can echo for decades. Right now, we know only enough to ask the right questions. Why did Isabel write a letter that was never opened? What was Alistair trying to confess with the words, if only I had? Who has been secretly visiting the hidden chamber, and why were those letters preserved instead of destroyed? Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't built on murder or treasure, they're built on regret, and regret has a way of changing every clue once the full truth finally comes to light. The journey through Blackthorne Hall is only beginning. Every forgotten shelf, every hidden passage, and every sealed envelope is part of a much larger story waiting to unfold. As Eleanor digs deeper, she'll discover that the library has protected far more than old books. It has been guarding promises, betrayals, sacrifices, and a secret that has survived 20 years in complete silence. If this first chapter pulled you into the halls of Blackthorne, don't let the next one find you missing. Subscribe now and join us as we unlock every hidden room, uncover every forgotten letter, and reveal the truth one page at a time. That way, when the next chapter arrives, you'll be among the first to step back inside the library. Until then, keep one thought in your mind. Some stories are written with ink. The most unforgettable ones are written with the words that were never spoken. We'll open the next page very soon.